Hello there, welcome to our part 1 of the scientific method and theory as we go through unmasking evolution. The scientific method has 3 components. First, making observations, and second, formulating a hypothesis, and from there, performing experiments. It is pretty obvious what making an observation is. You can use an example of a mechanic who's looking at a car engine in order to determine what may be wrong with it. In the process of making those observations, the mechanic may use tools and diagnostic equipment. And in the science field, observations are used generally with microscopes. There could be telescopes, scales, a variety of equipment that's made to make observations in science. Based on the observations made, then a hypothesis is formed. You could use the example of the mechanic. After hearing a certain sound in an engine, you can assume that that's an issue, and the hypothesis is a certain repair will correct it. Well, just like that in science, you make a hypothesis based on your observation as to what you will find in your final experiments. An example of this may be that you observe with a thermometer that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and so you can make an assumption if you put a new pan of water on the burner and heat it to that temperature, that again you will observe the same result. So your hypothesis is water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. To confirm that your hypothesis is correct, then you would perform experimentation. You perform experiments in a tangible way by either adding heat or perhaps freezing something, or doing something in order to make an observation that tries to support your original hypothesis. So when you talk about what is scientific method, well, it's these 3 components, and all 3 of these components are required. You must have an original observation, you must have a hypothesis, and then there must be experimentation. Then in science, the next thing to do is to repeat the experiment, and each time perhaps modifying your hypothesis or perhaps changing your experimentation methods in order to continue to discover what the scientific method can bring you through this process. And it is through the scientific method that you determine what is in fact scientific fact. So by having observations, hypothesis, and experimentation that are all in agreement with each other, then, and also generally considered to have to be replicatable, then it can be considered a valid conclusion. One of the most important reasons why this is mentioned is in many cases this is not what is found in what is purported as being scientific fact. What is a theory? Well, it can be anything from your idea of what is a good political position, or perhaps as to whether the weather is going to get better or perhaps it's going to rain. A theory is wide-ranged, but in science we talk about a theory as being anything that is not utilizing the scientific method. If an observation is not possible, then that is something that we might call an unobservable theory. In other words, it's a theory based on being able to directly observe the event. An example of this might be various rock layers found around the world. How long did they take to form? Or perhaps the Grand Canyon. Was it formed slowly over millions of years? Or was it perhaps a catastrophic event of a water dam breakage that caused great erosion quickly? Mount St. Helens has shown us that without being able to observe these events, we may see rapid rock layer formation, or we may see rapid erosion. And so without being able to observe the actual evidence when it's being formed, we cannot consider it scientific fact. We must consider it to be an unobservable theory. Another theory involves that in which that cannot be experimented on. Perhaps the phenomena is too far away, like the stars, the galaxy, various planets, and so experimentation is not possible. And in many cases, things cannot be experimented on. And so this is another element that would eliminate any science from being considered quote-unquote scientific fact and failing to meet the scientific method. if you are unable to experiment. Then there is the lowest lying theory that exists, which I'm calling on this slide hypothesis-only theory. This is the theory where there are neither observations nor are you able to perform any experimentation. The reason that this is mentioned here is that they are not rare. Almost all origin of life theories, the origin of the cell, even the origin of the universe through the nebular hypothesis, or whether it's the age of the earth or the age of the universe, evolution where one kind changes into another kind, where the fish become amphibians and amphibians become mammals and mammals become man. These are all based on hypothesis-only theories, meaning the event cannot be observed, nor can such event be experimented on, obviously. And so these are pure theory with no science behind them whatsoever other than conjecture and opinion. But it still masquerades as science, and many people call this blatantly scientific fact, while in fact it is neither science nor is it fact, but it uses a form of interpretation that is based on theories, again, of conjecture and opinion, not based on the scientific method where there's observations, hypothesis, and experimentation. Now, a lot of this is because it's impossible to do, but the reality is these ideas, which are presented to us in the textbooks as scientific fact, are nothing more than interpretation of the data and just a pure theory. With the concept of theory in our pocket, look to the next way in which a theory is used, and it's used very frequently in most of these areas we've discussed, and that is the onion theory. The onion theory is a term I'm coining. So here we see that the onion theory begins with any theory, other than, of course, anything that's been proven as empirical science through empirical science and the scientific method. If we begin with an unobservable theory, untestable, or a hypothesis-only theory, and we'll go ahead and call this first theory, Theory A. The way this goes is Theory A is assumed to be true, and then based on that truth, a new theory emerges called Theory B, thus creating another layer in our onion. From here, another theory can be placed on top of this theory, and this process can go on and on. Eventually, these layers of theories become something called, by scientists often called, a model, or in my case I would call them a worldview. It's much the way the Big Bang Theory begins. The Big Bang Theory begins with, in a single moment there was nothing, and then nothing exploded, and then in a fraction of a second became everything. And then that everything cooled off, and then through the nebular hypothesis placed on top of the Big Bang Theory, you've got the formation of the stars, and then from the formation of the stars you have theories about the formation of the planets, and then from the planets how the moons formed, and various theories about the Earth's moon have been proposed over the recent times. And so it goes on and on like that. But if the basic theory at the base of your onion fails, in this case the Big Bang Theory, then the entire theories collapse together. In many ways it can be said that the difference between the scientific method that draws valid conclusions through observable inductive reasoning is the opposite of just a theory, where the theory is non-observable, non-testable, which involves deductive reasoning. Another way of saying this is the scientific method provides valid explanations, while a theory is just a possible explanation. So always keep that in mind when you're listening to the debate of evolution versus creation. When you're listening to evidence being presented as scientific fact, always ask the question, is this in fact scientific fact, or is this theory? Thanks for listening, and have a great one.